All right, man, peace. So, brothers, I guess good things do come to those who wait, because Mr. Jimmy Butler, the former star shooting guard slash small forward of the Minnesota Timberwolves, demanded a trade from that franchise this past summer. And it has taken them a very long time to acquiesce to his demand. Why is that? It's because it's very obvious that Mr. Tom Thibodeau, the current coach of the Minnesota Timberwolves, was trying to see if he could develop a deal with another team that would provide approximately commensurate compensation for that star guard, because he had put so much stock into Jimmy Butler. And Tom Thibodeau understands that in order for him to try to maintain his job and that contract that he signed with the Timberwolves, he's going to have to try to appease Mr. Glenn Taylor. Well, overall, I think that this deal is great, not just for Jimmy Butler, but also for the NBA, because now they've had another star get transplanted back to the Eastern Conference, as opposed to what the trend has been, which is for all the stars to be migrating out west. I think it sets up a great semifinal round in the Eastern Conference, assuming that the top 4 seeds are going to be Toronto, Boston, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia, and that they will all advance in the first round to the second round. Once again, I believe that the second round of the NBA playoffs is going to be phenomenal, especially in the Eastern Conference. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Well, news this weekend. Do we now have a seismic shift in the power for the NBA's Eastern Conference? Boston was most people's pick to win the East right before the season started, but the 76ers changed the face of their team Saturday, picking up Jimmy Butler in a blockbuster trade.
Once again, what Jimmy Butler is going to provide is a great two-way player, or at least a borderline great two-way player, who they'll be able to assign to Kawhi Leonard, to Kyrie Irving, to Jason Tatum, to whoever's hot on Milwaukee. He may even see time trying to guard Giannis. So he's going to be a great pickup for them. Now all they have to do is get Markelle Fultz's confidence up before the playoffs. If they can do that, they're going to be a threat. They still don't have enough outside shooting, but he does make their team better. Now there are thoughts that he may bring some of the cantankerous nature that he brought into the Minnesota Timberwolves locker room into Philadelphia. Of course, that could be a potentiality, but I don't think that the issue that Jimmy Butler had with the Timberwolves is going to transfer itself over to Philadelphia. But who knows? Who knows? Because as far as I know, the main beef that he had with Karl Anthony Towns was that he was so stat-oriented and he was a terrible defensive player. Well, that does not seem to be an issue for Joel Embiid, at least in regards to defense. Now, we know that Joel Embiid is on record as stating that he wants to win MVP. So that means what? He has to put up numbers. So will he and Jimmy Butler clash? Who knows? We know that Jimmy Butler is a player who needs to have the ball in his hands. Ben Simmons is the point guard. He needs to have the ball in his hands. So will they clash? Who knows? This is going to be a referendum on Jimmy Butler, because at the end of the day, he wants his money. So if he becomes known as a player who just goes from team to team and thinks that he's better than he really is, and always ends up alienating himself from his teammates, that is going to cause a consequence when it comes time to sign that mega contract for him. So he better straighten up and fly right and understand the importance of these last few months of this last year of his current deal.
With the Timberwolves. So here's the deal. The Sixers sent Robert Covington, Dario Saric, and Jared Bayless to Minnesota for Butler. The Timberwolves will also get a second-round pick in 2019. Philly also getting center Justin Paxson.
Now, they really did not lose much. When I say they, I'm talking about the 76ers. Dario Saric can play. Robert Covington can play. As a matter of fact, Robert Covington is one of the best defensive players in the NBA by the metrics and the defensive win shares. But they're going to expect Jimmy Butler to fill in where Robert Covington left off in regards to defense. And they're also going to be expecting Jimmy Butler to bring them at least 20 points per game.
Max, I'll start with you. What does this mean for the Sixers?
Anytime you can trade non-all-star players, even if a guy's close to 7 feet and can shoot it, and another guy's supposed to be long and a good defender, anytime you can trade them for a perennial all-star, throughout the history of the NBA, the team that gets the perennial all-star in his prime is the winner of the trade. I get that.
Right, but the question is Jimmy Butler in his prime? He's 30 years old and he has chronic knee issues.
Here's the problem for the Sixers as it relates to this trade. And this was the problem with firing Sam Hinkie and replacing him with a bad GM. Remember, I told you Colangelo was a bad GM. It was a bad choice. I know he's not there anymore, but still. What Hinkie did was position the Sixers. He gave them what's known as potential energy.
Well, I partially agree with you, and I noticed this amongst a lot of the nerd boys and stat geeks amongst the sports commentary world. It's popular to become infatuated with Sam Hinkie now that he's gone. But while he was doing what he was doing, for the most part, he had very few people who acted as advocates for what he was doing. But in the aftermath of him being gone, now all of a sudden, everybody wants to call him a genius. The fact of the matter from my perspective is that I'm not quite sure that Sam Hinkie ever fully intended on the Philadelphia 76ers ever actually having to play to win. I think that he was selling the media and the Philadelphia fans at large a wish sandwich. Basically, he said, look, we're going to lose on purpose. We're going to accumulate all these top draft picks. And eventually, we're going to be in the position where hopefully we might start actually trying to win games. Because his MO was that it's better to be terrible than to be average or slightly sub-average. And I understand that to a degree. But you can't be that way for as long as they were. Because that starts to damage the psyche of your players. And I mean, let's be honest. The LA Clippers tried to do that for many years when Elgin Baylor was their head. And all we heard about was how terrible their franchise was run. Fortunately for the Philadelphia 76ers, once Hinkie was gone, they actually started to turn the corner. You can't just bring in prospect after prospect after prospect. You have to develop them and see what they have. And Sam Hinkie seemed to be somebody who just was infatuated with collecting #1 draft picks like they were baseball cards.
And here comes a little lesson on the difference, Stephen A., between potential energy and kinetic energy.
Oh, gosh. I was real bad in science.
If you roll a boulder to the top of a mountain, to the top of a hill, you've created, through positioning, potential energy. You've done the work to put the rock up there, right? Once it rolls down the hill, that's the kinetic energy. You've realized the potential energy. Hinkie pushed the boulder to the top of the mountain, and they thought, he's not the guy to pull the trigger and convert this energy. Let's go get Colangelo. This is now the final result of tanking for that half decade. This is the team you're going to have. They're fresh.
Well, that's how it's supposed to be, Max Kellerman, because Joel Embiid is 25 years old. He's not 20 years old. Ben Simmons is what? He's approaching 22. You cannot just keep selling a wish sandwich to your fan base forever. They had to go kinetic. They could not stay potential forever.
Fresh out of assets. This is it. They got rid of Hinkie. They didn't replace him with a smart guy like Hinkie, even if a guy, if he's cut from a different cloth, but a really, really good GM. They didn't do it. They failed to do it. And now, for half a decade of tanking, you have Embiid, Simmons, and Butler. It's not that it's bad. On the face of it, it's a good trade. They got better in the short term. But you have to ask yourself, is that a championship team? And was that worth half a decade of futility?
Well, Max Kellerman, you have to ask yourself, when we look at the tandem of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, and they're likened unto Penny Hardaway and Shaq, or even Magic and Kareem, that's about as great as you can do, because they have panned out thus far. And one would assume that they're only going to get better. Now, in regards to Jimmy Butler is a player that you hope still has enough gas left in the tank so that when Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons hit their prime, that he can still assist them in possibly being a championship contender. But the fact of the matter is that every generation, there are only about 2 or 3 teams that can win the title. When you look back in the annals of the NBA, it was pretty much only the 1970s where you had different teams winning the title every year. And I think in that era, even the Celtics won 2 titles. And I think the Knicks won 2 titles. So even back then, the championship pretty much stayed with about 2 or 3 teams per decade. Maybe at the most 4. But the Philadelphia 76ers, they look like a team that will be competing for a title. And that's all you can ask for. Because once again, you have franchises that accumulate #1 draft picks, and they never even compete for a title. Back in the 90s, the Clippers, they seemed to have the #1 draft pick every season, and they never did anything with it.
It didn't have to wind up like this. I'm not saying Hinkie drafted perfectly. But if you pull the trigger on Hinkie, it can't be a guy that the office thinks, the league office thinks is a good GM. It has to be actually a good GM. And then the Sixers would be in a much better position than they are right now.
Right, but what does that even mean, Max Kellerman? The reason why they brought in Colangelo was at the behest of the NBA, who realized that what Hinkie was doing was destroying a major market fan base. You can't just tank for 5 years, dude.
First of all, let's go through the weeds here and make sure we understand a few things. The league didn't pick Brian Colangelo. His daddy did it, Jerry Colangelo. Now,
right, but we know that Jerry Colangelo is plugged into the NBA, Stephen A. Smith. Jerry Colangelo has been plugged into professional basketball from the late 60s. So we know what that was.
Now, the league had something to do with Jerry Colangelo being in there. And who would Jerry Colangelo happen to be? One of the most highly respected executives in the history of basketball worldwide. The man.
I believe, if I remember correctly, I think that he was the person who drafted Dr. J. If I'm wrong about that, one of you brothers can correct me. But I believe that he drafted Dr. J.
Managing director for USA Basketball, who revitalized and reinvigorated that entity. Let's be very, very clear about that. So, no, Colangelo wasn't the ideal choice. And if Colangelo, meaning Brian Colangelo, deserves condemnation for anything, it's for drafting Markelle Fultz and giving up a first-round pick in order to get him. Lord have mercy, did he get hosed? Because Markelle Fultz looks close to a bust. I'm not there yet.
I'm not there yet either. But let me say this. I'm going to have to see great strides in Markelle before the end of this season, because he's a #1 draft pick overall. And you can't look that broken and shattered over 2 years. I understand the brother's only 19 going on 20 or however old he is. Maybe 20 going on 21. But he's going to have to show some competitive fervor. He's going to have to show some confidence. Because you just can't be a player who had a good jump shot in college, come to the NBA and your jump shot is broken. The NBA is just like any other professional sports league. It's a league of wolves, and they will devour the weak.
I'm trying to give this kid every chance under the sun. He really he could score, but he really doesn't look like he can play yet. And when you look at Jason,
I think it's the opposite. I think he's shown that he can play. His defense looks pretty good. He can go to the basket. He has a lot of good footwork in traffic, even though his body language is kind of awkward. But I'm just not sure that he can score. He has issues scoring because teams are just going to play him for the jump shot.
Jason Tatum, Dennis Smith Jr., Markkanen, Donovan Mitchell, to pass up on all of these guys with 2016 pass on Kyle Kuzma, but to pass up on all of these guys for Markelle Fultz. I mean, my De'Aaron Fox, Sacramento. Let me not forget it. To pass up on all of these.
Right, but why would they draft De'Aaron Fox when they have Ben Simmons? I mean, come on. We could talk about all these guys that they passed up, but really the only player that Philadelphia passed up who would have fit perfectly on their team would have been Jason Tatum. And I don't remember anyone stating that Jason Tatum should be the #1 draft pick overall. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't remember hearing about that in regards to Jason Tatum possibly being the #1 draft pick overall. Now, I heard him as a top 5 prospect, but #1 overall, no. I remember Lonzo Ball possibly being touted as a #1 overall draft pick over Jason Tatum.
These guys for Markelle Fultz, my God, it just looks awful right now. Having said all of that, I don't want to hear this stuff about Sam Hinkie, because you and I have had this argument on many occasions in the past. You don't mind tanking for seasons at a time. They didn't replace Sam Hinkie with Brian Colangelo. They got rid of Sam Hinkie because Sam Hinkie was perfectly content to literally tell a top 5 market in the United States of America, renowned for basketball, we're going to lose on purpose for 5 years.
Absolutely. And that meant that he intended to lose on purpose for 10 years. Because when you tell your fan base we're going to lose on purpose for 5 years, that means don't look for any signs of success for 5 years. And then after 5 years, we're going to act like we're trying to win. We're going to tell you that we're building up towards winning. So there's going to be no winning at all for 10 years. That's what he really meant when he said we're going to tank for 5 years.
That's what he was doing. Excuse me. The city of Philadelphia was not fine with it. They were not.
We could run a poll.
That's right. You could run a poll anytime you want to. You can run a poll anytime you want to. The fact of the matter is, working in that city for 17 years, being there every single week, knowing that city backwards and forwards, knowing that organization backwards and forwards. I understand you got your friends, but I'm going to roll with mine. And I'm here to tell you something right now. The city was not okay with that atrocity. It's just that they felt totally helpless because the Sixers said, this is what we're going to do. Take it or leave it. And that's what happened. Now, let's get to the Butler deal. Butler makes the Philadelphia 76ers, in my opinion, a top 3 team in the East.
Yeah.
Not top 2.
Well, I'm not quite sure if Jimmy Butler makes them a top 3 team because Milwaukee's playing very impressively. But who knows? They may fall off. I just think that their shooting is going to be better than the Philadelphia 76ers for the duration of the season. But who knows? We'll see. The good news for the NBA is that what Jimmy Butler does is he makes the Philadelphia 76ers a viable candidate to push these series from the second round onward to make them very, very competitive. And that's what you want if you're the NBA. You want to get to the second round of the playoffs where you're looking at all 4 series and you're saying, you know what? All these series could go 7 games.
Boston and Toronto is still better. But that's not why I love this deal, Max. You know why I love this deal so much? What did we keep saying about Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid? What help do they really have? Saric can shoot. Ilyasova, when he was there last year, could shoot. Blah, 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 blah. That's what we said. But what they had was shooters who couldn't do but so much unless Ben Simmons set them up because they were catch and shoot guys. Covington hit 189 3-pointers, catch and shoot style last year, which led to NBA. But none of them could shoot off the dribble. They couldn't create their own shot. They couldn't create their own offense.
Very, very true. And also with Jimmy Butler, you have a guy who you can give the basketball to who can make his free throws, unlike Ben Simmons. Beyond that, once again, you have a player in Jimmy Butler who you can say, go guard Jaylen Brown if he's hot, go guard Jason Tatum if he's hot, go guard Kawhi Leonard if he's hot.
In Butler, you have that. So what does that mean, Max? Now we get to look at Ben Simmons. Jump shot. It's not there yet. What you gonna do about it? We get to look at Joel Embiid, and we say, okay, as superstar status as you are, because this brother's big time. You got to play better with your back to the basket. You got to do that too.
Right, but Steve, you already know this is a face-up league now. The NBA is a face-up league. These coaches, they don't want to slow the game down. They want to speed it up. So I don't see it going back to that back to the basket style of play unless you just get an intrepid coach who's very courageous and says, I'm going to buck the trend. I'm going to try to actually, because we don't have the personnel to compete with jump shooting teams, we're going to try to slow the game down, junk it up, dirty it up a little bit, and try to get more physical and say the refs can't call every foul. We're going to work through our center. He's going to be a back to the basket center. He has all the myriad of moves of the centers of old. And we're going to go about trying to win that way. And you have to be courageous to do it. The last coach who was truly, truly courageous in that way was Lionel Hollins. And they fired him after they won like 59 games with the Memphis Grizzlies.
And last but not least, Max, 3 of their top 5 guards. 3 of the top. And Fultz, Simmons, and T.J. McConnell coming off the bench. 127 minutes he played. Attempted 2 3-pointers this year. Just 2. So I look at it from that perspective, and I say to myself, excuse me, you don't have long-range threats at the guard spot. Jimmy Butler helps that, and he forces us to look at Simmons and Embiid and say,
but he's not
okay,
a good enough shooter to really make a difference. Look, he'll make them.
He's a streak shooter, though. If Jimmy Butler get hot, he can light it up. Remember, he scored 30 points in a quarter with Chicago.
Better. As I said, they won the trade if you're just analyzing.
He tied his daddy's record. He tied Michael Jordan's record.
This trade, but they're out of assets. This is the team they have now. Until Ben Simmons starts taking and hitting long-range shots, the Sixers aren't going anywhere. They're not going to make noise in the playoffs. The problem is it's not just...
Well, Max Kellerman, you seem to be refuting yourself. You tried to allege that the 76ers made an error in firing Sam Hinkie. Now you're saying that the 76ers are not going anywhere until Ben Simmons starts making his long-range shots. Well, would he have been a better shooter if Sam Hinkie was still the GM? He still would have been terrible from the outside. So if the future of the 76ers is directly tied to Ben Simmons' jump shooting ability, they're not going to be a championship team anyway. And that takes me right back to the point that I made initially. Every era, there are only 2 or 3 teams that are going to win championships, maybe 4 in a decade.
Just Toronto and the Celtics that are better than them on paper going forward. Because they have smart front offices. Really, that's what it is. Ujiri and Danny Ainge are the two best GMs in the conference. They have the best teams. It's also the Bucks now. Budenholzer, I keep saying, he's the second biggest off-season acquisition behind LeBron James. Mm-hmm. He is getting that.
No, he's after Kawhi.
That team wide open.
I got a question for you on that. Because it's interesting. I don't disagree with you. Budenholzer is very, very interesting to me because Budenholzer is getting them open three-point shots. Does that not have you looking at Brett Brown?
I can't deny it.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, you know just like I do that there are different levels of coaches. There are coaches that are meant to lead a young squad to respectability, and then there are championship level coaches. And Brett Brown, he's not a championship level coach. There are probably 5 or 6 championship level coaches in the NBA right now. Brett Brown is not one of them.
What I'm saying to you is what you're saying, well, what if the Sixers were getting open three-point shots? How would they look?
I like Brown as a coach, but the question has to be asked.
Right.
They're not getting good looks. They're also not hitting shots, but it really comes down to, look,
right now,
if you're going to play next to
dead last defensively right now, dead last.
If you're going to play next to Ben Simmons, and you're going to be the third best player or one of the 3, you got to shoot a little better than Jimmy Butler. If Jimmy Butler had a better shot, in other words, if he was a superstar instead of just a star, okay, I may be singing a different tune. But Jimmy Butler can shoot enough in a good season. He's not a shooter.
But remember, I'm not saying he is. He is a 21 point, 22 point per game scorer. Yeah. But what I'm saying to you is he doesn't need Ben to get his shot.
No, that's right.
So because of that, that's incredibly important. Because again, now you don't have that onus placed on Ben Simmons in terms of getting a third.
And maybe Redick now gets better looks.
We're out of time, but I need a yes or no answer. You think the Eastern Conference now overall better than the Western?
I think.
Let me say this, because that's a great question. I think that the top teams in the Eastern Conference, if you were to transplant them over to the West, they'd probably rank right after Golden State. You say Golden State number 1, and then after that, I'd probably rank the top 4 teams in the Eastern Conference before I get to the next best team in the Western Conference, whether you consider that to be Portland or Denver or what have you. I don't trust Portland or Denver yet. Now, San Antonio, we know they're well coached. They're like a machine. But I would probably throw them in the mix with those top 4 Eastern Conference teams. But the NBA is in good shape right now. If you're the NBA, you already know. If you get a finals matchup of Golden State against Boston or Toronto, you're good with that. Even if you get Philly for some strange reason, which I certainly doubt, you're good with that. Because as long as you know that potentially the second best team in the NBA is in the opposing conference, you know that you're going to get great ratings in the finals.
Look, I think yes. And the reason why I say that is because there's Golden State and there's everybody else in the West. In the Eastern Conference, you have 4 legitimate teams that can come out of the East. 4.
I think there are 2. I think it's still Toronto 1 and
they're my
Boston 2.
favorites.
Yeah.
I think the Bucks are probably a player away,
I would agree with that.
But if they had that player, they'd be a title threat, and I don't think the Sixers are a title threat.
I agree with that as well.
I just meant because the West was so dominant for so long. We talked about the Wild West, and now feels like it's shifting to the East.
They're trying to.
I agree with you, Molly Karam.
They're going to try to move folks. You can bet the house on that.
Yeah, who's going to take?
Well, for Stephen A. Smith to state that the 76ers are going to try to move folks and you could bet the house on it, that means that he's heard something. I just would like to know who would take him at this point. He just seems so broken. But anyway, we'll see what happens. Peace.